Jacobs was actually very much against that, and she was an activist, a scholar activist, really, and she mobilized a lot of the communities living in Lower Manhattan to stand up for the preservation of their own neighborhoods. And here I'll show you some photos because I can speak many words, but a photo tells you a little bit more. So this is a photo that was taken in Lower Manhattan, just to give you an idea of what kinds of working class neighborhoods I meant. And here you see plans that the city government of New York had for this particular area, with these big highways, expressways, to make the city, the Lower Manhattan in particularly, more accessible for cars, because this is also very close to the central business district, of course, close to Wall Street. And you see all these big towers that they wanted to build alongside this expressway, but this is just cutting straight through neighborhoods where people had lived for generations. And here you see Jane Jacobs actually during one of the manifestations on the streets. And then now I'm going to take you back to London, where Ruth Glass was doing her research. So here you see an image of Notting Hill, really a working class neighborhood in the early 20th century. This is close to a brewery. And just another example of what this area looked like. Here you see a lot of kids playing in a bit of a rundown playground, really. And here kids playing on the street, and you see these beautiful buildings in the back. So they're very attractive, right? But the state of the buildings is very bad. Like, probably the landowners didn't invest in these buildings at all, because of these, relatively poor people that were living there. So because gentrification was first going, I forgot to mention that. Why gentrification? Why this name? Because another word for middle class is gentry. So that's why she called it gentrification. So the middle classization, basically, is what she meant with this word. Because I'm giving, of course, Ruth Glass and Jane Jacobs as examples, because it shows that gentrification was really a term that was first coined and first written about in an Anglo-American perspective. And it's really this classic gentrification, which I already explained a little bit. And how this works is, I put it in a table, a simplified classic gentrification process. So you usually have a few steps in this process. So the first step is artists or cultural grassroots initiatives move into dilapidated neighborhood, right? And then you see they reuse existing buildings, either permanently or temporarily. And the second step is then this neighborhood becomes interesting because you have all these new activities. So you have new crowds that come there, or people that say oh, this is actually a nice neighborhood now. I can go to a gallery, or I can visit my friends who just moved here. And these new activities, that's the next step. These new activities attract new inhabitants. So people that actually also want to settle there in this new hotspot. And because there is new inhabitants, you get a lot of new facilities and investments that are being made to attract even more people. The fourth step is that the rent and real estate prices of this neighborhood start to rise, because the demand is rising. And the fifth step is that the original inhabitants can no longer afford the neighborhood, and that they are forced to move out. And they're either forced to move out because they can no longer pay their rents, or they're literally kicked out by their landlords who want to make a lot of money by renting out or selling their property to new, wealthier people. And what you have in the end in step 6 is this is a gentrified neighborhood. But interestingly, this is just one form of gentrification, because when I started doing my research a while ago, I noticed that there is a lot of different forms of gentrification nowadays, because, and I will talk about that later, this original Anglo-American perspective is gradually changing to all over the world, as I already showed you in the newspaper clippings in the beginning of my presentation. So all these I just listed a few of the different forms of gentrification that I encountered, and there's probably many more, but just to go just to give you an idea of the scope we're talking about. So you have that classical gentrification, which I just told you about. Then you have inner city regeneration gentrification, which is gentrification that happens particularly in inner cities, and when particularly when inner cities are being revitalized or regenerated. Then you have suburban gentrification, which is obviously gentrification that's happening in suburbs as opposed to inner cities. Then you have rural gentrification, which is gentrification that's happening on the countryside or in small villages, so not in an urban context. Then you have new build gentrification. So that means like gentrification that happens because, for example, a neighborhood is completely torn down, and instead of like informal housing, it's being replaced by new malls or new condominium towers. So then it's really, there's nothing left of the original urban fabric, but you see a completely new, different context. So that's called new build gentrification. So that's in the context when you don't recognize the original neighborhood anymore. Then you have commercial gentrification. That's really just about shops. So usually gentrification is about residences. But commercial gentrification is really, for example, in a shopping street where you have all these like little shops that are catering really to the actual people that live there. So like a butcher or a bakery or like a small supermarket, and they're being replaced by big like department stores or like big international clothing shops such as whatever, H&M or Uniqlo, you name it. Then you have something like super gentrification, which means a neighborhood that gets gentrified for a second time. So just to give you an example, here in Amsterdam, where I live, you have a working class neighborhood called De Pijp, which was gentrified actually in the 1970s already. So it was a working class neighborhood in the 70s. It gentrified, so there was a lot of more like wealthier middle class people moving in. And currently, it's being gentrified again. So the gentrifiers of the 1970s are being pushed out by even wealthier people. Then another form is beautification or tourism gentrification. And that's really gentrification that's happening mainly for the purposes of attracting tourists and making the city nicer. And that's actually something that's happening in many places in Southeast Asia or in Indonesia as well, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a lot of different contexts in which gentrification can take place. And then this is the question that I always get from the urban professionals that I work with. It's like, but okay, if all of this is gentrification, what is then the difference between gentrification and just urban development, right? Which is a very legit question, and I had to think about what to answer. And then I realized that gentrification always has some fixed components. So there's always a matter of different income groups, right? So it's always wealthier people versus less wealthy people. There's always a component of displacement. So it's usually always this wealthier group of people that move somewhere, and because of that, the poorer people are being pushed out. There is usually this idea of pioneering, or even you can say colonizing. That's actually a term that you see being connected to gentrification often as well. And that's really this idea like, oh, we found this really cool, like rough neighborhood and we're going to move there because it's, like hip, or this is going to be the next hotspot in the city. So this sense of pioneering, which is a bit odd to say the least, because, there have been people that have been living in that same neighborhood for generations, or at least for a much longer time than all these new people have. And another component that's always part of gentrification is rising housing prices, whether it's real estate prices, selling prices, or whether it's rental prices. So these are, I think, 4 components that always make a certain development gentrification. Yeah, and I was touching on that already. So this post-colonial shift in gentrification study, so this bringing together the first 2 terms that I discussed with you up until now, is that you see that the gentrification debate, it started as really an academic debate, as sociologists or urbanists that were looking at this phenomenon of what gentrification actually is. But you see nowadays, and that's and that's also why I showed you those newspaper clippings, not only from Indonesia, but from other countries in the world as well, is that this gentrification debate has shifted in the last, say, 15 years, from purely academic to much more mainstream. Like much more people now know what gentrification is. I think if I would have had this same talk 15 years ago, when I was still in high school, I think, when I would have done this talk then probably when I've asked who knows what gentrification is, probably no one would have known. So yeah, it has become much more mainstream. And it's also shifting from the global north to the global south. So it's shifting away from the original, like the original areas where scholars were looking at gentrification, which is United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Western Europe. It's moving to different part of the world. And here we go again. I thought we had fixed this, but it's still moving. And there's actually two particular scholars that wrote about this in the 2010s, Colin McFarlane and Loretta Lees. And they wrote in a number of publications that there is a need for comparative studies from all over the world. So we don't want to know just about gentrification that's happening in New York or in Toronto or in London or in Paris. We want to know how gentrification is happening in cities in Southern America, in Africa, in Asia. Because Loretta Lees actually wrote about this, particularly in 2019, she called this planetary gentrification. That really means gentrification that's happening all over the world, all over the planet, not just in the United States or in the United Kingdom. And then an interesting question is actually always, and we can actually have a talk about this after my presentation or after my talk, is whether gentrification is something positive or something negative. And I'll give you a small example here in the Netherlands. So in Amsterdam, gentrification is happening, obviously. I just gave you an example of the Pijp. But here, gentrification has a very negative connotation because of this sense of displacement, because of this housing prices that are rising. Like Amsterdam is a very expensive city to live in, unfortunately. And there's a big lack of housing for a lot of people that want to live in Amsterdam. But interestingly, the city government, they have had this policy, especially during the economic crisis of 10 years ago, when they were crying out loud. When they were they had a policy to actually promote, like promote the use of empty buildings, like in suburbs of the city, like empty office buildings, for example, to be used as artists' hotspots, like artist workshops, breeding places, they called it. And of course they did this, like it is nice because, you know, these buildings were empty and these artists needed some places to work and to sometimes even live. So they were like, okay, let's bring this together, right? But of course, what happened is actually classic gentrification. Like because of these artists being there, these suburbs that were usually no-go areas, or people didn't want to go there really, or it was far outside the city center. So why would I go to this suburb? Because of this, these suburbs became suddenly attractive. Like, oh, I wouldn't mind living close to this really cool new club or this really cool new restaurant or this new artist gallery. So in that sense, you could argue that this particular policy by the city government was actually a kind of like gentrification promotion policy. But of course, the city of Amsterdam would never say that they did promote gentrification in any way, because they're like, no, gentrification is bad. We never promote that. It just happened. Whereas in Rotterdam, for example, another big city here in the Netherlands, you see that the southern part of the city was close to the harbor, lots of working class areas, and the city government really tries to upgrade this Rotterdam South area. And what they basically do is they have a gentrification policy. They basically say like, okay, so we want to get rid of a lot of the social housing here because we need to diversify the kinds of housing we have in this area, in this part of the city. So we're really going to invest in middle and higher income houses and apartment buildings. So that's really like an even obvious gentrification policy in a way. So yeah, that's just to illustrate you how city governments can really uh, uh, um, act differently on whether or not there's gentrification happening in their city and even steered by the city. So then, connection between gentrification and heritage, or particularly heritage conservation. And I thought, like, say 5 years ago, when I started thinking about my PhD, I was like, oh, this is a great topic because this is a great new focus on what gentrification is. And then I realized it's not, simply because um, this original definition of gentrification that Ruth Glass already coined in 1964, it had already this heritage component in it, because she was writing about gentrification in these 19th century neighborhoods, like these nice houses that I showed you in the images I already showed you before. And here's just to give you some some impressions of Notting Hill again. So where Ruth Glass was doing her research, this is the early 70s, I think. So here you see like a nice, the forbidden fruits. I don't know what kind of shop or place that is. Or a street scene here where you see all these different kinds of people from all walks of life just walking around. I think it was a market day, otherwise it wouldn't have been so busy. But here you see what the big parts of Notting Hill look like these beautiful late 19th century houses, but in super bad states, right? Very bad states of maintenance. And here's just another street view in Notting Hill as well. And this is, yeah, and this is another one. Here you see that there's actually also a lot of destruction going on to make way for new buildings, new housing complexes. So actually there is, and I found out that there is already a bunch of scholars that were looking particularly into this relation between gentrification and heritage, or gentrification heritage conservation, such as, this is, I do hope that it's not me, that I didn't put some kind of button where the slides go automatically. But if this is someone else who's doing this, please stop it, because it's quite annoying. So the three scholars that have been writing about this already in the 1980s and 1990s are Sharon Zukin, David Lee, John Caulfield. So they particularly wrote about this relation between heritage and historical urban context. So they basically say, to summarize for you, historical buildings attract new inhabitants. Why? Because they have character, they have potential, they look nice. And then they write how the restoration or heritage designation of these buildings is considered an improvement to a gentrifying neighborhood. And heritage designation actually in itself causes a new wave of gentrification and thus of unaffordability. So if you see like a former working class neighborhood where the houses are being renovated and restored to house wealthier people, you see like, oh, these houses are now very nice, let's designate them as heritage. But because they have this brand, there's actually new people coming in, say like, oh, I want to live in this heritage protected area. And what you end up with often is that you see historical neighborhoods that become sterile. They become less authentic. They become lifeless in a way. And I'll just show you some photos of what Notting Hill looks like today. So yeah, on the one hand, you can say it looks very pretty. The houses are still there. You see all these shops, but that is absolutely true. And of course, this is an area where I think we would all like to go and to visit and to do some shopping. But on the downside, probably these apartments up above these shops are really, really expensive, and the shops equally. And this is just another example of like these houses that are being have been renovated and now probably are sold for more than 1 million euros. And it's just, I like this last one, because this is just like, it looks like a photoshopped photo, especially with the big BMW in front. Like, it's a really big difference with, remember the photo that I just showed you of the Notting Hill street where the kids were playing in the street? This is probably just around the corner from that. And this is what it looks like today. So yeah, from a heritage conservation perspective, you can say, well, great, because these houses are still there and they're beautiful, restored, and looks pretty, but it's a very different kind of neighborhood now. All right, but now let's have a look at Kota Tua, Jakarta, right? Let's bring it a little bit closer to home for you guys, or for most of you guys at least. 83%, right, from Indonesia, I believe. So this is some photos from Kota Tua. This is particularly the Kali Bazaar that were taken in 1971. And I'm just showing you because, remember, the photos I just showed you of Notting Hill, they were also taken in the early 70s. So it's really around the same time. And it's, for me, it had a similar kind of vibe, right? This is what this same place, you see the same buildings. This is what it looks like today. Well, not today. This is 2019 when I was last in Jakarta, and when the urban park had opened, but it was not in use yet. As you can see, it was still closed off apparently. And this is another photo of the 1970s of the Kali Bazaar. And this is what it looks like today. So you can still recognize this modernist building. But yeah, it looks much cleaner, much emptier as well. A little less lively maybe. Well, this is now. I know that this area is, in the weekends, it's swamped with people who are just hanging out there, which is very nice to see. This is a photo from the same photographer taken in Taman Fathahila. Yeah, so right now, of course, it's just like this. It's just an open area, very sunny, very warm. When you're visiting, very little shadow, but there's a lot of people just hanging out. But previously, like in the 70s, you saw that there was a lot of life actually. Yeah? And here you see the only colored photo I found of this period of Taman Fathahila, showing the bus stop or the bus station, apparently that was in the middle of the square. And you see actually still the trees that were there. And this is what it looks like today. So it looks, yeah, there is still a lot of activity. There's a lot of people that are hanging out here, but it's a different kind of activity. It's not more, it's more like tourism than daily life activities. So yeah, and that brings me to gentrification in relation to unique selling points. What makes a neighborhood unique? And that is its local history. It's the heritage traces, the traces of the people that have lived there, like the local communities that still live there, and the stories of these people that make a city, any city or any neighborhood, unique. This is what shapes a neighborhood into what it is today. And just to give you an examples, what are these tangible traces then? Like tangible, like what does it look like? Like their houses, their schools, their places of worship, their public buildings, gathering places, which can be in the streets as well, not only in buildings. It's businesses, local businesses, it's festivals. All of these make a neighborhood unique, any neighborhood. And these unique selling points may attract tourists and investments and new residents, right? Because of these uniqueness. People always are looking for something that's unlike where they're from, or when they're visiting, for example, you want to see something that's different, that's very unique. But beware of the great contradiction, because these unique selling points, they may attract development, but they may also attract gentrification and disappear through gentrification, right? Because if you have all these nice local businesses, for example, Kota Gede in Yogyakarta, which has been known for its silver industry for a long time, right? But nowadays, you see that it's because like this silver industry is slowly dying out, and that's of course has to do with the craftsmen themselves. They're getting older and they don't have any people to take over they don't have any sons or other like apprentices to take over their businesses. So it slowly disappears. So who knows whether Kota Gede will still be known as like the hub for silver industry in the next 10 or 20 years. And the same goes for Jakarta Kota Tua, apparently one of the functions initially was that it was a hub for doing shopping, for grocery shopping, for public transport, and nowadays, or at least Taman Fatahila is not anymore, because now that's just a very nice pedestrianized area. But yeah, the first step of what gentrification is understanding. So what is this? And usually these are the questions that I ask the urban professionals that I work with, like, what is gentrification and how do you recognize it? And then do a field work and do the field work method with them. So yeah, how do you recognize gentrification? And now I'm going to go back to newspaper clippings again, so to find some answers, because if you Google this question, some answers will pop up. So basically, this article from Forbes already gives a clear indication. The opening of a Starbucks and cafes more generally, it's a leading indicator of gentrification. Then, to go back to this Compass article that I already mentioned in the beginning of my talk, it says this particular text, translated in English, evidence of gentrification in Bali. So this article is about gentrification in Bali. Can be seen in the massive development of tourism supporting sectors such as hotels, resorts, bars, and restaurants. Okay, so that's also very tangible and quite in line with what the Forbes article wrote. And this other Indonesian newspaper or article refers to, this particular text. In the city of Yogyakarta, for example, there are problems with hotel construction, again, hotels, and relocation of people, which are examples of cases to explain domestic gentrification. So these already give some indicators, right? So let's narrow it down a little bit. So there are a lot of different indicators that can show you whether gentrification is happening in a particular neighborhood. So yes, the first one is the one that was mentioned, all of these three newspaper clippings, new types of retail, so new kinds of shops, and hospitality. So indeed, hotels, new cafes, new restaurants that really cater to a different audience than the existing businesses. Another one is the investments in public space. So, for example, what you see in Kota Tua, Taman Fatahila, that has been pedestrianized a while ago already, and the current, more recent at least, revitalization of the Kali Bazaar into this urban park. Another indicator is the renovation of existing buildings. So when you really see that buildings are being renovated, for example, for new use. And another one is new construction. So when derelict buildings are being torn down to make way for new construction. And there's generally, you see more diversity in people in the streets. And this is a little difficult, of course, because how do you know whether a city is more diverse? Because you can also say, like in Taman Fatahila in the 70s, when it was still a hub for shopping and for public transport, you can say that there was already a lot of diversity of people in the streets. But what I mean in this context is that you see more wealthy tourists, you see like more wealthy people. You see, for example, more tourists walking around there. You see these new businesses, these new functions, they attract different kinds of people. Then the fieldwork method that I do. So basically I start with a lecture introducing theory on gentrification and heritage, so which I already did with you, so we can check that one. Then the next one is to do fieldwork and particularly do a mapping with the urban professionals. Gosh, I really do apologize for this. I don't know why it's skipping the whole time. I hope it's not too inconvenient for you. The third step is that I asked the urban professionals to make a group presentation based on the mapping that they did, so that they can present their findings. And the last step is that I asked them to write an individual essay, usually about gentrification as it's happening in their own city. So not just the city where we did the mapping, but in their own city, for example, their home cities. So we really can see whether they understood the concept of gentrification and also see how they explain gentrification in their own context. And this I'll just zoom in a little bit on the fieldwork, because this is an essential component, of course, of this method. And I asked the urban professionals to identify the environmental, the social, and economic assets in a neighborhood in your city. And here's just some examples of what I mean. Environmental assets are things like buildings, so their typologies, their building periods, the current use of those buildings. So it's either the original function, but also the new function, or whether buildings are vacant. Then how is public space being used? Then the social assets, social meaning local communities living and or working in the neighborhood, the social structures, their backgrounds, their ethnicities, and these people's cultures and traditions. And the economic assets are traditional and new businesses, formal and informal sectors, and creative industries. All right, that was it. And I don't know, I think I'm a little longer than 30 minutes. I've been a little longer than 30 minutes, and I hope the screen stays like this. I want to thank you for bearing with me and for listening to me. I do hope, I don't know if there's already any questions, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have before I move to the questions that I have for you. And let's just see how it goes. We have, I think, more than an hour left for discussions, because I really would like to know what you think of this topic and of the things that I just explained to you. I put here on the bottom of the slide, I'm more than happy to connect with all of you. So please feel free to either send me an email on the email address below, or find me on Twitter at RMC Vermeulen, or you can connect with me through LinkedIn. So please, if you would like to connect, that would be great. And I would actually also be interested if there's anyone who says like, hey, this is a very interesting topic, I would like to discuss this further with you. Please let me know either now in the discussion or afterwards, or in the chat. But yeah, I'm more than open to expanding my network in Indonesia, or in with all of you, basically. All right, shall I stop sharing the screen so I can see people as they ask questions?
Thank you, Remco. You need a break between?
Maybe let's do questions first.
Okay.
Let's just see how it goes. I'm still doing fine. I hope everyone else is doing fine.
Ibu Nadia, do you have any comments? Thank you for the presentation, Remco. So you explain what is gentrification, started in the American context, and then expand to, all over the world. And also you show us some cases, not only some cases in Indonesia, especially in the case of Yogyakarta and Bali.
Yeah.
But always related to tourism too, as you mentioned.
Well, not always. It's often related to tourism. And
I mean, the one in Indonesia?
Yes. Yeah, the ones in Bali and Yogyakarta, the examples that I mentioned, yes, definitely related to tourism, but I don't think exclusively related to tourism. But that's one of the things we can talk about.
Yeah. And also interesting that from your illustration, government always tends to deny that they create or they make policy to promote gentrification.
Depends on the government, though. There is actually like also urban professionals that I've worked with at IHS that they say like, oh, gentrification is great. We want to pursue that. And these people are urban planning experts that work at ministries or at city governments. So it's very much depends on the city.
Or perhaps as a word, gentrification is an evil, right? But as an action.
Evil.
I mean, as a word, people always see that gentrification is an evil, right?
It has a negative connotation, definitely. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, there is already one question from Pak Budi Evrianto. Pak Budi, you want to... Okay, sorry, because I have to change the setting. Unmute, okay. Pak Budi, silakan kalau ada pertanyaan. So we have two questions. We start with Pak Budi, and then second is from Jos from Netherlands. Yeah. Okay, Pak Budi, silakan Pak Budi.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening, Remco.
Hi, hello.
Hello. My name is Budi. I'm from Lampung.
Hi.
I have two questions for you. Do you hear my voice clearly?
Yes, I do hear your
Very
voice
clear, Pak
clearly.
Okay, thank you.
Loud and clear.
First question. First question. You mentioned earlier that gentrification concept is not exclusively related to tourism. And then my question is, please show us the example of gentrification that is not closely related to tourism, maybe with other things, other field of business or economic area. And then the second question, uh, what is your what is the the hmm, apa ya, peran? What is peran itu apa, Pak?
Role.
What can you tell us what is the role of the government?
The
That
role of
is
government.
the role of government in term of uh, the good gentrification for cities. I mean, in term of how government produce policy or something like that.
Okay.
So what is the role of government in good gentrification that can improve the economic aspect of all cities, not only some wealthier person or classes. Thank you. Thank you.
For all people.
Sorry, Pak Budi mengajar. Are you teaching?
No. I
Architect.
work for. Yes, I'm architect.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Budi.
Okay.
Yeah,
Please,
yeah. You're welcome.
Thank you very much for your questions, Babudi. Very interesting questions as well. Let me go to your first question. And actually, maybe you saw me moving, but I was typing along with the question. Yeah, so gentrification, you said gentrification doesn't always have to be related to tourism, which is true. And I was thinking of, I can give you an example here in the Netherlands, of course, but I was first thinking maybe I can give you an example in Indonesia to bring it a bit closer to home for you. And then with a small disclaimer that, as you know, I'm just starting my PhD research, so I still have to dive into the matter fully, particularly when it comes to Indonesian case studies. But when I was last in Yogyakarta, which was in 2017, I believe, so 3-4 years ago, I visited Kota Baru. You know Kota Baru, like the former Dutch neighborhood in Yogyakarta.
Yeah.
And I think you could say that here gentrification is happening, but it's not catered to tourists because it's catered to wealthier Indonesians, right? Because there you see, and I don't know if have you been to Kota Baru recently?
No, not recent.
Not recently. So just to sketch also maybe for other people here. So Kota Baru is a former colonial neighborhood where the Dutch people used to live in these big, nice houses. And you see now that a lot of these houses are being bought up. Either they're being torn down and replaced by much newer houses, or they're being changed into businesses. So either boutique shops or restaurants or cafes. So basically like Kota Baru was a mainly residential area, and now it's more turning into a diverser area, right? When it comes to functions. Maybe you can actually, there's another example that I can give in Menteng in Jakarta, where you also see that these, of course, Menteng was also a colonial area where you had because the Dutch lived there, it was an affluent area already. So in that sense, you cannot say that it's changing from a poorer area to a wealthier area. But there is, in a sense, a form of gentrification happening in a sense that these houses are being, like the colonial, the historical houses are being torn down to make place for these huge houses that fit exactly on the plot of land on which they were standing. Right. So in that sense, you can also say that it's also a form of gentrification happening there, in the sense that wealthy people are being replaced by even wealthier people. Is this does this answer your question a little bit?
Yes, but if
Yeah.
please, if it doesn't matter, can you explain? Can you give example abroad? Not from Indonesia, maybe
Abroad.
from other. Yeah, maybe in
Oh,
Dutch.
and
Can you?
yeah, I can give examples in the Netherlands, but I thought I have to bring it close to home because most of the people
Oh,
here
I see.
are from
I see. I see.
Indonesia.
I see. I see. I see. I see.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
but now, for
If you
example,
don't mind, if you
no,
don't
no, I
mind,
don't mind. I don't mind at
yeah,
all, of
please.
course. Well, another forms of gentrification is what's happening basically in Amsterdam, the city where I live, right in the Netherlands. So you see the Pipe that I mentioned before, or the Jordaan is another area which was a working class area in the historical inner city of Amsterdam. Really working class. There were like factories, and it was like houses that were very small and narrow with lots of families living in them. And nowadays it's a hipster, like, no, not even hipster, it's a yuppie area, right? There's a lot of very wealthy families living there, all these very quaint little boutique shops and all of that. But that doesn't have to do per se with tourism. Yes, of course, tourism is a factor because tourists visit the area because it's nice. But the developments in this area were not catered to tourists. They were catered to accommodating, locals like Dutch people or people that live in the Netherlands. That can also be expats, of course. So that was like this area, these areas like the Jordaan and the Pipe, they didn't gentrify for tourism purposes. They gentrified to attract wealthier inhabitants, basically. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Then your second question, Pabudi, and that's a difficult question. So thank you for already starting with a difficult question. What is the role of government in terms of good? Yeah. Let me recap your question first, so I get it straight. What is the role of the government in terms of good gentrification of cities? Like, how do government make policies, and how can it benefit people from all walks of life, right? Not just wealthy people.
Yes.
So, of course, Pabudi, unfortunately, this is the golden ticket question, right? If I would know the answer to this question right away, I wouldn't have to do my PhD research.
Yeah.
So, but I can give you, like, I already gave a little example of the Rotterdam case study.
Yeah.
Right, where you see this Rotterdam South, which was a working class, like, immigrants, harbor workers, harbor area, and the city's basically saying, okay, we need to diversify this whole city area because it's only so, like, I think 80 or 90% of the houses in this area is social housing, right? So lower income people, and they say we need to diversify because, and actually Jane Jacobs also wrote about it. The healthiest cities are diverse cities, right? So cities where people from all classes and all walks of life can live happily, right? They all have their own place. So what the municipality of Rotterdam, they have like a big, you can say it, a regeneration policy. They really literally, the housing, they work together with the housing associations that own all the social housing units, and they basically the social housing associations, they sell off a big chunk of their social housing units, so that, and then they invest together with the municipality in building houses or apartment buildings that are really catered to middle or higher income people in order to diversify this former working class neighborhood. So that in that sense, you can say from an urban planning perspective, it's a good development because this area becomes more diverse and more, how do you say that, in a way, because you can, like, because they're not only investing in houses, they're also investing in infrastructure, in public, in accessibility, in public transport, in squares and streets. So in that sense, you, from an urban planning perspective, you could say it's benefiting the city and it's benefiting everyone who lives there. But of course, it doesn't benefit the people who are being kicked out of their houses. So this is just a part answer to your question, I'm afraid.
Remco, in the case of Rotterdam,
yeah,
government said they're doing gentrification or they're doing regeneration.
I do know that the city government of Rotterdam is less allergic or less anxious for the gentrification word.
Okay, okay,
the,
okay.
the G word.
Okay, okay. So although the concept is gentrification, but they didn't put the word gentrification in their policy.
I think no. I actually think if you would look for the word gentrification in their policy documents, you would find it.
Okay, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that's not the case in Amsterdam.
Okay.
Right, Pak Budi, I hope I answered your questions.
Yes,
Second
thank
question.
you very much.
Terima kasih Pak Budi. Yeah.
Ya,
Second, we have
sama-sama. Terima kasih.
Pak Jos from Netherlands. And then third, we have a question from Fikri Angga, and then fourth, Pak Abdul Karim. Yes, Pak Jos.
Yeah, hi Remco. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I'm wondering, to me, when hearing your presentation, it seems as if gentrification is unavoidable when a place attracts more.
First, can you introduce yourself? Sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm not necessarily working with heritage, but I'm a geographer working in the city of Groningen, working with all different kinds of livability projects in neighborhoods. But I'm just very interested in the topic of heritage. And my question is, when hearing your presentation, it seems as if gentrification is unavoidable when a place attracts more people. How can you avoid it? And second, when accepting that it's unavoidable, how can you deal best with it?
All right. I thank you, Joost, for these questions. These are, of course, just like the previous question, these are also $1 million questions. Also one of the reasons why I want to do my PhD research in the first place. I'm just writing down the last part of your question so I don't forget answering it when accepting how to deal with it. I think, and this is, I mean, for all of the answers I'm giving, be critical to what I'm saying, right? Because I'm only one person. I have my own my own expertise, my own research that I do. I have my own opinions, my own background. So this is just one answer. It doesn't mean that I have the knowledge of the whole world in me. So that's one disclaimer. But yeah, I think your reflection that gentrification is unavoidable is quite right. I think in a sense, gentrification is unavoidable simply because if you look at it from neoliberal perspective, you have a rundown neighborhoods, investments are being made, whether it's by the city government, whether it's by a housing association, whether it's by private owners or like investors. And either of the people that put money in, that invest money, they want a return on their investments, right? Now, the trick is how fast you want to return on your investments. If you want to make quick money, like a lot of private developers, for example, would want, they of course sell their newly renovated buildings to the highest bidder, right? Because that's the fastest way to make money, to get a return on their investments, right? Whereas you can imagine, for example, if you are the city government, you have different, you want to be city government for all people, not just for wealthy people. And what you see in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, maybe less so in Groningen, I'm not sure, but at least in Amsterdam, but for example, also in cities like Venice or Barcelona, is that, fuck, I lost my train of thought. I do apologize for my language. I have to go back. I was thinking too many different things and now I lost my train of thought. Can you repeat your question, Joost?
Yeah, how to if you can't avoid it, how can you avoid it? And also, if you accept that it's unavoidable, that gentrification will happen, how to deal with it best?
Yeah, so like I think a part of the answer is return on investments. Whether that's what I was saying before, like whether you want it make quick money or whether you are in it for the long run. Cities, governments are usually there for all of their people, and they can their, how do you say that? Their vision towards the future is generally, not always, but it can be more longer term than it is than it is short term. For example, I don't know if you know, and I know that some of the people here in the audience know about it. There is in Amsterdam, for example, this organization that's called Stadsherstel, which you may have heard of. I know Punto knows it, and Nadia and Ria know it. But it's basically a private organization that has been buying up houses in the city of Amsterdam, like when it was still affordable. That was the 1950s, 60s, 70s, when you could still buy a derelict house in the city of Amsterdam for a couple of guilders. But they basically make always a cost calculation. They say, like, we buy this building now, and it needs to be cost, like, hoe zeg je dat? We want to have a return on our investments in, say, 50 years. If we can manage that, if we can make a calculation and we can say, like, okay, with rental incomes from these restored houses in 50 years, we have a return on our investment, they're fine with it. They start with this project, right? But a general private developer always wants a return on investments as soon as possible. So I do think that part of the answer to your question is, yes, gentrification is unavoidable, but how can we best deal with it? What is one of the ways that could be a solution is, like, you know, adjust your the time frame in which you want to return on your investments. Is that a somewhat satisfying answer to this question?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, Joost. Next question.
Yeah, Bu Nadia, you have the questions already?
No, but I think there are some people who raise hand before and asking for question, because I think the last 20 minutes I will try to give to ask the participant who wants to share the situation in Indonesia regarding to gentrification.
Yeah, there are some questions, for example, from Fikri. He said that, you know, gated communities, yeah, Remco. It
Yes.
happens a lot, yeah, in Indonesia. So his question is whether gated community also considered as gentrification.
That's a good question. In principle, I would say yes, because usually you see these gated communities, they are being built in locations where there was previously either kampungs or there was zeg je dat? Savas, you know, like it was countryside, right? It's on the outskirts of the city usually. And even if they're in the city, they're usually built on areas that were either empty, vacant, or there were indeed informal settlements, kampungs, if you can translate it like that, because of course, kampung is an urban village, but you can also translate it as an informal settlement. So yes, in that sense, you can definitely describe a gated community as gentrification. Also because gated communities are usually catered to wealthier people, middle or upper class people. So that's just a short answer to your question.
Okay.
Fitri, right?
Yeah, Fikri. And then question from Angga Cipta. Is it possible that gentrification happen in suburban area?
Yes. Yes, that's the short answer. Of course, I already mentioned in my intro that there is such a thing as suburban gentrification. I actually believe I read an article about suburban gentrification in, was it Yogyakarta? At least it wasn't in a Central Java city. Central Java city. That's also why I mentioned it here. But yeah, for example, the gated communities could be one example. Another example is the area where I live right now in Amsterdam. So this is a suburb. It's called Osdorp in New West in Amsterdam. And it really has been like a working, like lower income area for a very long time. But what you see now, because the city center of Amsterdam is getting really full and really, it's very, like the density is very high, the housing prices are really high. But here in this suburb, there is relatively a lot of green and there's a lot of opportunities to increase density, so to add a lot of new houses. It's a similar context as in Rotterdam South. So most of the houses here are social housing and the city wants to diversify. So they're basically investing in not only in new housing, but also in the center of the suburb, which is a shopping area. And the municipality is really investing in making this shopping area more attractive by adding more facilities. For example, they are going to add a big cinema complex and a bigger theater and new student housing and new kinds of shops and new supermarkets and all of that. So yeah, it's definitely can also happen in suburbs.
Okay. And we also have interesting questions from Ibu Nur Hikmah. So she was doing a research about Bogor, about urban project in Bogor, and I think Ibu Hikmah, can you ask your questions directly to Remco?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mas
Also,
Punto.
please also share your experience about your research in Bogor to Remco. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Oh, well, okay. Actually, my research in Bogor is not about gentrification, but it's about how the character of the streetscape can have an effect on urban identity, on the image of urban identity of Bogor. But I have a question for you. That's a very, very nice presentation. Thank you. But I want to know more about what is the specific difference between classical gentrification that you mentioned before with beautification. It's because in Indonesia, I think a lot of gentrification is more close to beautification. That's my first question. And the second is how to identify that a place need what kind of gentrification? What's the aspect to identify that this place need this kind of gentrification? Or I think it's actually three questions. Is it possible? Is it possible for a place to receive more than one kind of gentrification? Thank you.
Yes, these are very good questions. Thank you very much, Ibu Nurik. Is that correct?
You can call me Iim.
Iim, okay.
Iim. From
Thank you very much for your very interesting questions. I was just typing along with you, so that's why it took some time to respond. I'm obviously interested, by the way, to know more about your own project in Bogor you're working on, but maybe we can save that for next time.
Okay.
So you have three questions. Your first one was the difference between classical and beautification gentrification, right?
Yes.
So I think you're right when you said that you feel that beautification gentrification is the type of gentrification that's happening a lot in Indonesia.
Yeah.
I think I agree, but that's also one of the things I'm going to look at in my research, my PC research. So the difference is that beautification, gentrification or beautification projects are usually initiated for tourism purposes, for making the city more attractive, right? So for example, if you look at Kota Tua, but also, for example, if you look at the historical inner city of Yogyakarta,
yes,
these areas have been or are undergoing revitalization projects, either by the city government or by private developers or private parties, building owners, mainly for the fact that these cities are on the tentative list to become UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Right? You know, they want to make these areas more attractive, more beautiful. They want to restore the historical buildings so that they can show UNESCO, like, look, we have this very pretty, very beautifully maintained urban areas. Please give us this World Heritage status. Simplified. So, and in that sense, classical gentrification doesn't have to be like I already said before, it doesn't have to be connected with tourism. It can also be connected with just, you know, like local residential, local citizens, like people who live locally. Whereas beautification is really intended to make particularly the area more attractive, and that's usually for tourists. So I would say that's a big difference. Classical gentrification is not always catered, it's not per se catered to tourists, and beautification, gentrification is. Okay.
But if you do a classical gentrification, not for tourism, but if a place become more attractive, become more beautiful, it can also attract tourism.
Yes, I do agree with you.
Like in Kota Baru, maybe.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you that it often goes hand in hand. That's absolutely true. But like I said, it does, like the initial, I think the initial reasoning, or the reasons why investments are being made in particular neighborhoods, they can be mainly for tourism, or they can be mainly for just, you know, creating a more diverse living environment, like in the example of Rotterdam South that I gave.
Okay.
All right. Then the second question that you said is how can you identify what kind of gentrification is happening?
Yeah.
Is that was your second question,
yes,
right?
Yes. What kind of gentrification that a place need? How to identify? Yeah.
So of course, your question is already a question for me. Like, what do you mean? Like, what kind of gentrification an area needs?
Yeah.
How do you mean that? Because,
I mean, If you saw a place, maybe about Kota Baru, maybe, yeah. Is it really Kota Baru need some kind of classical gentrification, or is it urban gentrification, or is it a beautification? How to identify? How to
So basically, it's not. I think it's not a matter of what kind of gentrification does an area need.
Oh.
It's basically what kind of gentrification is happening. Like, what is happening? What is the kind of gentrification that is taking place in a certain area? And then one of the things you're going to look at is what are the circumstances, right? What are the reasonings behind who is investing in these buildings? What kind of functions are new to the neighborhood? Who initiated that? So it's mainly looking at a neighborhood, like trying to explain what's happening to a neighborhood, rather than writing out a recipe like this is the kind of gentrification this area needs. Does that make sense?
Oh, so it's not about what is needed, but it's about what is happening, right?
So I think for me, gentrification is something that it is like. All right, no, it's actually two things. So on the one hand, gentrification is something, there is a certain change going through a neighborhood, and we're gonna by looking at the conditions and the context in which these changes are happening, we can see what kind of gentrification it is. That's one aspect. The other aspect is, like the examples I gave of Rotterdam South, it can also be steered, right, through the city government. They can say, we want to diversify this neighborhood, so we're creating more middle and higher income housing. We're going to invest in public space, all of that.
Oh, I see.
Right. So it can be different aspects, different perspectives, really.
Okay, I see.
So I'll move on to your third question, because I see there's also other questions coming in. Is there more than one kind of gentrification possible that it happens in the same neighborhood? That was your third question, right?
Yes.
Interesting question. I like my first answer would be yes, it's possible. For example, if you look at Yogyakarta, Jalan Malioboro,
yes,
right, you can say that the Jalan Malioboro itself could be a form of commercial gentrification.
Yes.
Right, because you see all these small local shops that are being pushed out by the bigger malls and bigger chains, right, by bigger names than just the local brands, basically.
Yeah.
Whereas, for example, if you would go into the residential areas just behind Jalan Malioboro, you can see that there is, for example, tourism gentrification happening because there's a lot of new hotels being built to cater to tourists, right? So it's the same area, but there's different kinds of gentrification happening.
Oh, okay. Okay, okay, thank you. Yeah, I look forward for more discussion, but there's a lot of
questions.
Participants here want to ask.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pak Punto.
Ya, terima kasih Bu Iim. Okay. And then suddenly, a lot of questions coming.
I hope it's a good sign, though.
It's very good sign. It happens, yeah. Right. Before the time stop, then suddenly a lot of questions coming. Okay, which one we have to deliver to you? Okay, I think we start from Lara.
From Aditya Rizky. Punto. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question.
Yeah, Aditya Rizky.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, silakan.
Good afternoon. My name is Aditya Rizky Snandia. Hello, greetings, Remco.
Hello.
Yeah, I also fortunately graduated from IHS in 2017.
Nice.
Yeah, I also did a research about gentrification, but I related it with the phenomenon of creative placemaking. Yeah, but unfortunately, I find it quite difficult to identify the occurrence of gentrification in Indonesia because there's no, maybe there's not enough quantitative data about it, especially about the median income. Because as far as I know, in the theory, the main indicator of the gentrification is there will be a change in income, since there will be an influx of what is called wealthier people. But unfortunately, in Indonesia, the data is just not enough. It's compared to the global north context. So, in your opinion, how could we, in global south context with not enough data, to identify the occurrence of gentrification in the particular area? That's all. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for your
question. Di mana?
Bagaimana, Pak?
Mengajar atau apa?
Oh, saya asisten peneliti, Mas, di ITB. Ya.
Oh, oke.
Ya,
terima kasih. ITB. Silakan, Remco.
All right. Thank you, Aditya, for your interesting question. I do think that in that sense, as you're describing, gentrification is quite a new phenomenon to Indonesia, right? So in that sense, yes, you can definitely, it's true that there will be less data available than, for example, in a city like Amsterdam, where gentrification has been happening for over half a century already. On the other hand, you do see, I think, as an outsider, so bear with me, I do feel that recently, and maybe even very recent, so even after you wrote your own thesis on gentrification in 2017, that gentrification has been more widely happening in Indonesian cities than 5 or even like 5 years ago. So for example, for me, a school example is Kota Tua, and then particularly, for example, the Skali Bazaar urban park project, right? So if you would look at the indicators that I mentioned earlier, like one of these spatial indicators is investments being made in public space or renovations that are being made to houses, new functions that come to a neighborhood. Kota Tua is really kind of a very nice case study, right? Because you have this urban park, so there, and the pedestrianization, of course, of the Taman Fathila was already a longer while ago, but this park was more recent. On the other hand, you see now that there are new businesses, like there's this new hostel, there is new shops, there is new stores, cafes that have come to Kota Tua, which weren't there a couple of years ago, and they really cater to a different kind of audience than the street sellers, for example, the street vendors that you see on the streets. So in that sense, yes, there is like when it comes to the SEC data like for example, you mentioned the income of people. Maybe there is not a lot of data available yet, but there is, I think, a lot of at least tangible indicators that gentrification is happening in Indonesian cities. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, thank you very much,
All
Remco.
right. Yeah, thank you.
Makasih, Mas Aditya. Okay, next questions. Ibu Nadia, which one?
I think from Chandra Prajapati.
Oh, okay. And
Could
very
you?
long question.
Yeah, it's very long question, but it's very interesting because it's like the explain the situation in Nepal.
Okay.
So please, Chandra.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I will just read the question that I have. It's actually not a question, a kind of just willing to know your opinion. So I will just read it here. The real estate market plays a huge role in the process of gentrification, as I have understood. So in a city where I live, the local government has proposed to limit the selling of house or land to the locals of the town only. So that this is necessarily not only targeted to curb the gentrification process, but I think it helps to some extent. But also there are also some kind of drawbacks, as this kind of policy contradicts to the constitutional freedom given by the country to the people to settle, their rights to settle anywhere inside the country. So and also there was also a similar instance that was applied in the villages in the western Nepal, where it's a trekking hotspot, but that's a very small scale and it's in a rural part, so it doesn't make much difference. But in the cities, in Kathmandu Valley, where many people from all over the Nepal, come to live for the better life, or for the better education. So it's really hard to resist that kind of pressure from to kind of resist this gentrification process and the pressure from the people who have more wealth, to kind of not sell the land or any property to these the wealthy people. So so what do you think about this kind of particular policy? If you have work out on this, like maybe you have read or you have done some research and the policies. But the also drawback is also that if we curb, if we limit the real estate to the local people only, then obviously there will be a very less investment to the place. So there is also still a problem. So what do you think about this policy?
I think I feel the same as you do. So you say that this limit that the government has put on people that can acquire land in the city is limited to locals only. I think it has its pros and its cons, right? So the pros are you basically you regulate who is coming to settle in the city and who's investing in the city. And of course you see, and I think that's the point I tried to make earlier with one of the questions when I was referring to cities like Venice and Barcelona is, but also here in Amsterdam, like a big component that contributes to gentrification, to these housing prices that go up, is foreign investments, right? So people from outside the city or even outside the country that move there and see opportunistic and they say like, okay, this is an interesting investment for me, right? So in that sense, if the Kathmandu government has this policy, it will benefit this. It will prevent foreign investors to swoop in and bring up the housing prices. So that's good. On the other hand, yes, it does it disables people that are not from Kathmandu to buy land there, and that's questionable when it comes to settling the rise of settlement, as you said. Maybe I can give a small example, because I do think that policies like land use policies are very are an important factor in any context of gentrification. And I'll give you another interesting example, I think, here in Amsterdam, for example. So most of the land within the city boundaries is owned by the government. So even if you own a private house, like say a family house with an own garden, the ground on which the house is standing, which you own as a private owner, is still owned by the government, the land, right? In that sense, the government can not manipulate, but they can steer a little bit in housing in the land prices, which is good. And what happens is you are a tenant of you pay the city government a certain amount of money, like basically rent, kind of, every year to be able to live on that piece of land. Now you can choose in which period you want to pay off this rent. You can also say, I pay it off completely right away, and then you own the piece of land. And that's actually a new kind of policy they've been trying out since starting last year. Also to make money, of course, as a city government, because they can sell their land. In a way, it's maybe good, because then people can own actually also the land on which they're living. On the other hand, I can also imagine that in the longer run, this will make sure that the land prices in Amsterdam go up. So I do think what you're describing is very interesting, but also there is no perfect answer or perfect context to this.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question, though.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the questions and your answer, Remco. So I would like to invite all participants who wants to share the gentrification in your city. Do you also experience this gentrification, or do you want to sharing something that related to this topic connected to your city or your experience in Indonesia? So please. Nobody raised hand, so I will.
You have to give people time to answer your question.
No, because in the chat I saw that Pak Arya Abita share his talk about gentrification and tourism. Could you please to explain that, Pak Arya?
No, actually, I don't want to share, but I just listening what the discussion going, and I heard that most of the I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but a lot of person thinking about gentrification is going to tourism, but actually gentrification is going for the people who live in. So we do gentrification not for others, but for us, for the people who live in the area. Then if they are giving something interesting and people coming and we have a mutual benefit, tourists coming, that's okay. But not the other way around. I think that's better then. Maybe that's what I thought.
Can I respond to that?
And listening.
Yeah. Yes, please.
So interestingly, Pak Arya said that gentrification can be nice.
Friendly gentrification.
Yeah, I think he wants to explain that not all gentrification is negative, but also there is a positive effect also, as you told us before, Remco.
Yeah.
Gentrification is giving a new life.
Isn't
it?
Yes.
Thank you, Pak Arya. Yeah, go on, Remco.
So, thank you very much for your observation, Pak Arya. I actually agree with you that gentrification initially doesn't have to be bad, right?
Yeah.
If you have any rundown neighborhood in which investments are being made so that gentrification is happening there, you can say, like, houses look nicer, There's different new people coming here that want to settle here or want to visit. It's safer, it's cleaner.
Right.
It's more diversity in the kinds of shops that are there, and that's all true. Unfortunately, though, what you often see once this development starts, it doesn't stop.
Okay.
Right. So it gradually becomes more expensive and more exclusive to the people that can afford to enjoy this new neighborhood. So, for example, and I don't know if there's anyone from Malaysia in this session, but if you look at Georgetown, Penang, for example, you see that, like the World Heritage, like the inner city, the World Heritage site is in most places beautifully restored, but it's mainly catering to tourists now, or wealthier people, at least wealthier visitors. Hello, Kiran, you're from Malaysia. So yeah, in that sense, Kenneth is also is saying that it's basically, so yes, you can say it's good because the neighborhood looks nicer and it is cleaner and it's not messy and it looks well maintained. But is this the case for everyone? Can everyone enjoy this beauty and all these new functions and facilities or not? And that's the difficulty with gentrification.
Gimana,
All right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree with.
Thank you.
No, otherwise, if I give my opinion, maybe we can discuss further. Then there's a lot of friends want to discuss with you.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe
the friends from Malaysia can also.
Yeah. I think comments from Kenneth is similar with comments from Lara Newberg and also from Arida Yasmin. Arida also said that, is there any concept like participative gentrification, for example?
Yeah.
And I think, Kenneth, can you, Kenneth?
And sorry, Punto. And after that, I would like to ask Fandi, the promising young generation of Indonesia who wants to, who already raised hand after Kenneth.
Yeah, sure. After Kenneth.
I think I came across there's one overseas case study. I forgot whether it's Boston or somewhere else. There's a gentrification going on, but because they have nicely done community engagement, so the initial tenants are being the first priority to buy back the property at the lower end value, when they already foresee in the next 3 to 5 years they are upsurging of the pricing. So I think this is a good way to control that. And also another case study in Berlin is that the residents themselves, they self-organize to redevelop their neighborhood, so that the area after is, is benefit them in the long run as well, because this is what they envision for. And then because they themselves act as a developer, so eventually they know how to negotiate with the banks themselves. So they can also come into the point that understanding the developers, but having the negotiation power with the local council and etc. So that could be another model, inviting the local residents become the developer themselves.
Yes.
That's all.
Thank you. Kenneth, where are you from? You're from Malaysia?
I'm from Malaysia, yes.
All right. From Penang or from KL or?
Ipoh.
Ipoh. Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for sharing this. And these are indeed, I think what you're describing could be part of the solution, right? Of these golden, like how can we have, as Punto likes to call it, friendly gentrification? If that's possible at all, because maybe there's already a contradiction in these two words. I do agree with you that these are interesting examples that are hopeful, if I can call it like that. But I am a little bit cynical in that sense, because I always have the feeling with these kinds of developments, like the example that you gave in Berlin, right? Of these the original inhabitants have the first priority in buying back the houses that were being restored, or tenants that can buy the houses in which they used to live and then own the building, right? Mostly, these people don't even have the money to buy these new houses because they're very expensive, right? They're newly restored houses, and often you see this in the context of social housing, right? So social housing is being renovated, and then the housing association says, oh, but the current owners, you can first buy it, and it's only 400,000 euros for your apartment, and they have no way of being able to afford that. So, and of course, there is scheme.
Also need to be counter-proposed as well. If the residents are organized themselves very well, getting the professional lawyers, bankers coming in, I think there's a new model that needs to introduce back to the developer industry and not be ahead by them actually.
Yeah, exactly. No, I definitely agree with you that, like, okay, let me first make my cynical counter to what you were saying, and then I'll do like the idealistic one, because I do also believe that what you're saying has components of moving gentrification towards more inclusive instead of exclusive. And also, like, and I think part of that is the communities being able to organize themselves, right?
Yes.
I think that there is definitely a success factor possible there, because the moment that you start empowering yourself as a community, so you don't act just as a single household or a single home tenant, but you team up with all your neighbors, right? The stronger your voice, the more people you have empowered, the more people that you organize yourselves with, the stronger your voice becomes. So instead of you have a municipality and a housing association and a developer, and then you have all these individual people, then all these individual people, they can all be wiped away by these big players, right? By these big stakeholders. Whereas if they all are organized within one community organization, for example, then they are themselves a big player at the table. So they can, and it, of course, then still kind of, it depends on the kind of city you live in, right? Because there are such different types of politics and types of societies. Like maybe here in Berlin, or like in Berlin or here in Amsterdam, you know, like you have the kind of society where the governments, they actually listen to the people. They're forced to listen to the people because they're, you know, they are being voted in office by them. Whereas there are, I'm sure, numerous of examples also in Asia where the government is all powerful. And if the government is not all powerful, it is the investor that's all powerful. So even if a community is able to organize themselves, it still is no guarantee that they won't at some point be wiped away by a wealthy and very powerful private developer. So that's the difficulty of this, but I do still think that you're absolutely right with the examples that you gave, that community empowerment, community organization could be part of the solution.
I just think this kind of example should showcase more, rather than most of the conference that I attended, there's always one question audience who should, what's the difference between this gentrification and urbanization?
Yeah.
I think for the industry players, we should have more case study which show varied approach of counter gentrification, rather than asking for redefine what is gentrification again and again.
Yeah, maybe I can give you an example, which I cannot take credit for this example because I didn't work on it, but I have read about it. That's the only thing. So that's why I can share it with you. When you say like we need more examples of good practices, basically, right? Have a look at Kampung Tongkol, which is part of Kota Tua in Jakarta. In brief, and I'm sure maybe there is people in this session that know much more about this particular neighborhood because they actually worked with it. But Kampung Tongkol, I think it was around 2014. It's a kampung that's basically in between one of the arms of the Ciliwung Canal and the old city gate, or the old wall of the Batavia Castle. Right, it's the only remaining part of the city wall. So this is a kampung that's in between there. It's like a long stretch of kampung. And basically at some point in 2014, the DKI, the city of Jakarta, went to Kampung Tongko and said, okay, we're going to evict you, the whole kampung, because we need to, on the one hand, we need to widen the canal for water management purposes. And on the other hand, we want to make this part of the city wall more accessible for tourists, right? Because it's a nice historic site. Then actually this kampung, they organized themselves and they were helped by a lot of different stakeholders, including the UPC, the Urban Poor Consortium.
Are you referring to the slum squatter by the riverbank?
Sorry?
Are you referring to the slum squatter by the riverbank in Jakarta?
Yeah, it's one of, like, there's a lot of kampungs, of course, like that, but this is a particular example in that particular location. So basically what they said is, you know what is it you need? So you want to widen the canal and you want to create like a nice walk along the canal and you want to create a nice walk along the city wall. We can do that, but then we will do it in a way that we can still live here. So basically they cut off a part of like 4 meters of their houses. So they made their houses smaller. And in that sense, yes, they created, on the one hand, they created more space on the waterfront. They created more space in the back where the city wall was. They made it more like nice and safer and cleaner. And they keep it clean themselves. And they said like, okay, this is what you wanted, but we can still live here now. And then the city government was like, okay, that's fine. So up until today, the Kampung Tongko is still there because of this own community-driven initiative. Of course, the question is for how long will they remain there? But up until now, it's basically a success story.
I think Bandung is also a case, also a successful story as well. So that's all from me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kenneth. Feel free to connect, by the way.
Thank you, Kenneth. So I think we will run out of the time. So I will ask Fandi. Yeah, I will ask Fandi to give a response, and later for the last response, I will invite Hasti Tarekat to share the example of participation gentrification. Or so please, Fandi.
Thank you, Mbak Nadia.
Yes.
And greetings, everyone. I'm Fandi, currently master student in University of Indonesia. Remco, back to your question about how do we recognize the gentrification in here in our area. I make some reflections about your previous presentation that I got the impression that the gentrification mostly coming from the intervention of the outsiders to the community or the neighborhood around in one area, and then the price are getting higher, etc., etc. But I have an experience that I encounter with the different kind of community in East Java, in Banyuwangi, during my work. It's kind of I would call it like gentrification from below. I really interested to it, and I want to know if you know more about this. It's like it's like a rural area in East Java, and there are less intervention. It's not like living in the city, tourism, etc., etc. So most of them are farmer. And still farming up until now. And during about 2006 to 2008, there was a trend in the village. So everybody in the village, like most of people in the village, working as a foreign workers to the Middle East and then to Taiwan and some countries in Asia, and then they come, they get lots of money and they bring the money to home, and then suddenly their home got like they renovate their home in order to meet the higher quality of home. Let's say it's like previously they use wood, bamboo, etc., and then move to the concrete and then bricks, more permanent home, and something like that. And then when I went there, actually the food price is similar with Jakarta. You know, it's like weird for me because it's in the village and it's supposed to be cheap, but when I eat like the fish, the price is more than 30,000 rupiah. It means like it's the price in the good seafood restaurant in Jakarta, something like that.
Yeah.
So that's my experience that I want to share with you, and I want to know more if you know something like that in another part of the world.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Fandi. This is a very interesting case study. So, of course, we already know each other. So let's have a talk about it later in detail if you want. Yeah, okay. I see you smile, so I think that's a yes. It's actually very interesting. And I do think you're asking me for another example. I can give you an example here in Amsterdam, where you also have a kind of within a community, gentrification happening within a community, really. So you have a suburb here in Amsterdam called Kolenkit. And basically what you see here, or in that area, is that, so it's basically an area with a lot of social housing, with relatively small apartments, big families living in there, but also with a very tight community. It's mainly a lot of Turkish Dutch people that live there, so from Turkish descent. And what you see happening in the past, say, 10 years is that, of course, kids grow up, they move out, they go to high school, they get an education, they start working, making their own money. And then at some point when they have, like a nice job, they're like, but I still want to live in my old neighborhood. So what's happening is that the children of the parents that move to that neighborhood, they actually start buying up apartments in that old neighborhood, but instead of just buying one apartment, they buy two apartments next to each other and then turn it into one big apartment. And of course, that brings up the prices a lot because they create larger housing in buildings that originally had smaller apartments. And because of this development, like more and more people have been doing that. So people from their own neighborhoods, but that have more money because they have, for example, a nice job or a good education or whatever, they are able to buy two houses instead of one, and then creating one house. So then, you get rising housing prices as well. So that's actually another example of gentrification within communities, because these are not outsiders. These are people that actually grew up in that neighborhood. So that's another example of that gentrification from below, as you called it.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe you should position this typology of gentrification as well at your.
Yeah, Fandi, I think if it fits in my own research, it's great. But the difficulty is, and you saw it already, like you have so many different forms of gentrification, so many different contexts and different conditions. So, but yeah, let's have a chat about this further later.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Remco and Fandi. So now, Mbak Hasti.
Hi, I think it's polite to show my face while I'm talking. Hi.
It is very polite,
everybody. Yeah, thank you. No, Remco, because you said there are so many types and forms and factors related to gentrifications. That's why I think I encourage myself to share what happened in my neighborhood in the Bijlmer, in the southeast of Amsterdam. It's called one of the largest ghetto in the world, actually, as the failed implementations of the modern architecture experiment in 1970s. But anyway, to fix the failure of the modern architecture experiments, they do generations for 20 years. And but they also would like to save some part of this failure as a lesson learned for the world, to as an example. And what they do is actually to sell one block of the flat. It's called Kleiburg. It consists of 500 apartments for a very cheap price, relatively cheap price. It's 66,000 euro per unit. So that for Amsterdam is nothing. It costs nothing, and people are free to do to renovate these apartments. And but more than the physical regenerations, what I find a very successful and interesting example of this project is because this project regenerations not only invite the people to take active participations, but also successfully to mix the different kind of social and education communities. So the Bijlmer is famous for, let's say, the low income, low educated migrants, but because of this project, 500 apartments, they bring the relatively high educated middle income, I'm sorry to say, white, the Dutch, from all over Netherlands who wants to live in Amsterdam. And to have a mixture of these social economic backgrounds, it also improves the economic social interactions. So we have to see not only the physical generations, but also to see the non-physical aspects, the social economics, and a lot of things. So to be honest, Kenneth Wong, which hi Kenneth in IPO, has mentioned about the examples of Berlin. And I have seen a lot of generations projects all over the world, and also in developing world and developed world. And I think the Kloosflat Kleiberg is one of the most successful, in my opinion, because it's not only in the physical term, but also economic, social mix of achievement of that. So there are a lot of informations on the website. I'm going to leave most of them in Dutch, but I have chosen one in English. And you, with Google Translate, you also can check other things in Dutch. Very interesting. And they have won award on international level. So it's not only my opinion, but it also approved by professionals and academicians. Thank you.
You're also professional and academic, Hasti.
Thank you, Remco. Join you.
Okay, thank
you, Nadia.
Yeah. Do you have any comment, Remco, or because we?
No, like I'm just very glad that that Hasti shared this example of Kleiberg.
Okay.
I think it's a very interesting example as well. And it's good to also end on a positive note. So in that aspect, thank you as well, Hasti.
Thank you, Mbak Hasti. So I'm sorry for all participants who already write some question that we cannot read it and asking Remco to response, especially for Suhardi Hartono, because it is also actually this is interesting because he mentioned that gentrification process in light of its potential to either strengthen the worsen racial relationships in that particular part of urban area. So I think Suhardi, you can directly contact Remco to have discussion on this topic, because I think this is very interesting also for you, Remco. But so sorry, the time is.
Time is up.
Yeah, time is up now. So I will give back to host, and thank you, Remco, for your great presentation, and thank you for all participants for all your very interesting questions that we can have a very nice discussion. So do you want to say something, Punto?
Oh, no. Thank you, Remco. Of course, we just start this discussion, and I believe because Remco is in the middle of the process, we can have another discussion as the result of your ongoing research, for your PhD.
Yeah,
and of
maybe
course,
in a year or two, I can come back for another heritage talk, and I can update you on my research.
Yes, and good luck for your PhD.
Thank you very much. And thank you also for people who asked their questions in the chat. I'm sorry that we were not able to address it, but maybe if the organization shares the chat, I can maybe still respond to questions if you get in touch with me. I'm more than happy to continue the conversation.
Okay, we will invite you maybe next year, Remco.
Thank you.
After you have a lot of material to share again with
after my
us.
field work.
Yeah.
After my field work.
Okay, thank you all. So Umu, I give it back to you.
Thank you, Bu Nadia and Pak Punto, for moderating the discussion for today. For Remco, I believe you have the second poll, right? If I'm not mistaken.
What did you mean? Sorry.
You have. Oh, I thought you have two polls to.
Oh yeah, I had another poll. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last one. Can you share it?
Sure. Yasmin?
I forgot about it. Yeah, it's just to see whether whether you learned something from this session. Well, there is a majority for the most important one, right? Yes, now I do. then that's good to hear that a lot of you learned something today. I'm happy about that.
Yeah, because of your presentation.
Yes, and the discussion afterwards.
Sure.
Thank you.
Oke, silakan Umuh lanjut.
Also, we do have some exciting news. I believe who's gonna announce it? Is it Pak Punto or Bu Nadia regarding the launching of the new books?
Okay, could you please share the screen, Umo?
Sure.
So, okay, on the next March, we will have two heritage discussion special edition. We will announce the date later. So the first one is a book launch from Obrolan. He already write a book about the Kuipers, architects Kuipers, in the Dutch language several years ago. But next month he will launch the book in English edition. So please join, and this book will also be could be sell in Indonesia starting next month. You can buy it in PDA or in other prominent bookstores in Indonesia. And the other one, Punto.
Yeah, next month we also have a presentation from our friend from Myanmar, an organization called Doh Ain. And they are doing several interesting projects in Yangon, placemaking projects, and also some heritage restoration projects in Yangon. I saw some of them. I also see some of them participating in this session. So, and hopefully next month they will have an interesting presentation about their projects. Thank you, Ibu Nadia.
Thank you, Mo.
Well, thank you, Bu Nadia and Pak Punto, for delivering the announcement. Also, we will have a short closing remarks from Bu Riri Winandari from Trisakti University. The floor is yours, Bu Riri.
Terima kasih, Mbak Umu. Thank you to all participants who have joined us till the end. So we are very honored to collaborate again with PDA and IAI in Obrolan Heritage 48. Thanks to Mas Remco for your presentation today. And for all participants, please join our next collaboration in March with many special presenters. So don't forget to join us again. Thank you, Maumu.
Thank you, Bu Riri, for the closing remarks. And I believe we haven't have our photo session, right? Okay. So because we have quite a lot of people, let's see, we have five pages of screenshots to do. Please turn on your camera if only if you want to, but it will be great if you do. We will, Mbak Yasmin, I mean, will take the screenshot. Okay.
Umu, masih ada satu lagi itu. Jangan lupa ya, satu lagi nanti.
Oh, okay. After the photo session.
After photo session, Umu.
Okay. Mbak Yasmin, do you want to cue it or? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. We have another closing remarks. I'm sorry, Pak Boy Birawa, the floor is yours.
Ya, gimana Bu? Gimana? Sorry.
Closing, Mas Boy, dari IAI.
Oh, sorry. Penyingkat gitu. Oke, terima kasih. Sebenarnya karena ini lebih seru. This is very interesting because it's related with Kota Tua. Actually, gentrification is not really new if you understand what the industrial revolution and then capitalism. Yeah, capitalism is also affects so much on this gentrification. And then regarding what we do in Indonesia and Kota Tua, especially. Colonization and post-colonization have to be understood fully. Otherwise, it's a waste. In the glance, gentrification is look a good idea for Kota Tua. But if you think like that, then means you don't understand Kota Tua and the layer of layers. It's a lot of layers inside that have to be understood before go further. Don't forget that we have a JOTRC, yeah. Jakarta Old Town Revitalization Corporation, it failed. It's not as easy as that way. Actually, it's already contribute the ownership, the government, the investors, the experts, but still fail. Why? We have to find the solution. Gentrification is not simply answer the question, but we have to find the best way. I think, but somehow it's good for us that gentrification is something that happened in the actual world. Even what happened in the United States about they don't want the immigrants, but they need it. How to solve it? Gentrification is not a solution for them. What happened in Myanmar, what in Thailand about the between politician and economic and civil society is not easy to solve it. So that's only what my opinion about gentrification. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Boy Birawa. Well, Leslie, thank you. Remco, for the insightful presentation. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience. Thank you for all collaborators, and most certainly thank you to all participants. Thank you for carving out your time to join us today. We will meet again next month in our next Obrolan Heritage Talk. Well, then it's time to bid goodbye. Thank you all. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. See you next one.
Thank you, Remco.
Thank you, Remco. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Remco, for the enlightenment.
Thank you, Remco.
Remco, thank you.
Terima kasih.
Sama-sama.
Terima kasih PDA.
Terima kasih,
Terima kasih IAI.
Remco.
Terima kasih Pak Arya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Pak Hari.
Terima kasih semuanya.
Terima kasih semua.
Terima kasih.
Selamat ulang tahun Kak Ria.
Selamat ulang tahun Kak Ria.